Thank you. It's good to be back at Indiana University. The first time I was here was 13 years ago to study elementary Uzbek with Malikaka. And unfortunately, I didn't continue Uzbek. I switched to Mongolian, as you see. And specifically, the Mongolian that's spoken in China. So this will be, so far, the only sociolinguistic presentation at this conference. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about why I got into this topic and chose to present it here. So I've been kind of observing Inner Mongolia for about 10 years, since I first went there and first started studying Mongolian. And it's a bit of a mystery. How likely is Mongolian to continue being used among the Mongols in China long term? So although there are about 5 million ethnic Mongols in China, which is more than in Mongolia, they don't all speak Mongolian, and the use is declining, but at the same time, very active. I was teaching English, and all of my students were fluent Mongolian speakers. So that brought me to wondering about endangered languages and safe, well-supported languages, but then what about this gray area where young children are still learning it, but the number of speakers is going down? What's happening there? And when we assess endangered languages, there are various methods of determining whether a language is endangered or how endangered versus how vital it is. And I've tried out a few different ones. Maybe you're familiar with the ethnologue. And so in the past 3 years, they just started putting vitality assessments for all the languages. And they use what they call the EGIDS scale, which is derived from Joshua Fishman's GIDS, GIDS scale. So I've tried that. I've tried ethno-linguistic vitality a little bit, which was first introduced by Giles, Boyes, and Taylor. But now I'm going to try this UNESCO methodology, which was recommended starting about 12, 13 years ago. So first, I want to make sure we all know which type of Mongolian I'm talking about. So these are all the major language families spoken in China, and Mongolic is these colors, so they shade it differently depending on other languages that are next to it. So you can see there's some Mongolian spoken in Xinjiang over here, some Mongolian spoken in the Amdo region, and also through Inner Mongolia, and there's a lot of Chinese right next to it and some Chinese-Mongolian overlapping areas. In reality, the Chinese-Mongolian overlapping area should now go all the way to the Mongolian border, okay? This map is a little out of date. So, and this is where the Mongolic languages and the dialects of Mongolian proper kind of fall with respect to the borders of the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region. So what I'll be talking about is basically the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region, plus I'll talk a little bit about this area over here, which is in what you might know as Manchuria, or in China it's just called the Northeast. So unfortunately, I won't be able to address these groups or those groups because I don't know enough about them. Just talking mainly about Inner Mongolia. And so that's the region that I'm looking at, the Inner Mongolia Autonomous Region and neighboring provinces Heilongjiang, Jilin, Liaoning, and Hebei. But I'm just talking about people who identify themselves as Mongols or are identified by the Chinese government as Mongols. So that excludes Daur because they're classified differently. And I'm sometimes including Khamdagan Mongol, sometimes not, but here I'll mostly be including it. So those are some of the dialects. I won't go into how they're classified because I'm trying to take a broad perspective on this population of speakers, not any one particular variety. Oops, sorry. And I'm following as closely as possible this document that a UNESCO panel of field linguists published in 2003. It's still linked from UNESCO's main website on language endangerment and vitality. And so they have the scales to use and some written guidelines on how to apply them. And I know that UNESCO has later come out with, later and earlier, come out with different versions of the assessment guidelines. So I'm using the 2003 version, and its distinguishing characteristic is it has 9 different factors to assess vitality, and you're supposed to look at all of them and not just say, okay, where on this scale is it? You say, where is it on this scale? Where is it on this scale? Where is it on this scale? So I'm going to walk through each of the 9 factors one at a time. First, I'll let you know what they all are. So the first group of 6 is language vitality. Intergenerational language transmission, so from parents to children, the absolute number of speakers, and then the proportion of speakers within the total population, shifts in domains of language use, and then the response to new domains and media. So that's like, is it used on the internet? Can you send a text message in this language? Is there television in this language? And then number 6 is the availability of materials for language education and literacy. So is there a writing system? Are there textbooks? Things like that. And then the next group of factors is language attitude factors. So number 7 is policies and sort of institutional attitudes towards the language. What's its official status? Is it actually used in official contexts, or is it just kind of an empty official language? And then 8 is the community members' attitudes towards the language themselves. And finally, the urgency of the need for documentation of this language. Is it a completely undocumented language? Is it very well documented? So the type and quality of documentation. I'm going to do this in 2 stages. I'm going to go through the factors, the 9 factors, one by one. And for this, I'm kind of basing it, it's a somewhat subjective judgment. The previous literature on the topic of Mongolian vitality is really scattered. It's just kind of mentioned here and there a little bit. Or there are anthropological studies focusing on identity and language, but not so much language use. So I'm going to kind of synthesize everything that I know from my experience in reading and talking to people and doing fieldwork on the topic. And then I'm going to pay special attention to variation, and can I really assign one number to all of Inner Mongolia? And of course the answer is usually no. And then I'm going to do a second round where I look more closely at a few factors based on my own field data. Hope I'll have time for both of those things. So factor 1 is assessed, intergenerational language transmission is assessed in this way. Which generations speak the language? If it's safe, it means from children, babies on up, all use it. If it's unsafe, it's used only by some children, or by all children but not in every domain. And then level 3 is the parental generation and up. Level 4, grandparent generation and up, etc. Sorry, level 2 is the grandparent generation and up. And all of these have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, where 5 is the best position and 0 is the worst. So if I had to speak of Inner Mongolia, all of Inner Mongolia, it's clearly level 4, because some children are learning the language in most, or like in all of the domains that you would have as a child, they use Mongolian. The second half of the statement is not true, that it's used by all children in limited domains, because some Mongol children don't use it. But on the other hand, level 3, parental generation and up, is clearly not true. There are a lot of children that speak it. But if we account for all this variation that exists, whether by region or by dialect group or by personal choices, you get every single situation possible, okay? From all the children speak it, some of the children speak it, only the parents speak it, all the way to there are no speakers and have been no speakers in this area for 100 years or more. For absolute number of speakers, okay, the UNESCO guidelines don't give us a scale. They say it's impossible to establish a rule for interpreting absolute numbers. but a small speech community is always at risk. But for Mongolian, I'll say they have a few million speakers in Inner Mongolia, maybe somewhere between 2 and 4. The absolute maximum would be almost 6 million is the number of ethnic Mongols in Inner Mongolia, but it's definitely not all of those people, so less than 6 million. For factor 3, we're back to the 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scale. So proportion of speakers within the total population. So for this, it depends on if we take the total population to be ethnic Mongols or people in Inner Mongolia, because the population of Inner Mongolia is 17% ethnic Mongol, that's 17%, and 79% Han Chinese, I believe. So suppose we just say Mongols. Roughly a majority speak the language, maybe a minority. Some people say it's more like 3/4, some people say less than half, some people say 80%. We really don't know. So it's a good thing the scale is kind of vague. Again, if you go by region, you get every single situation. If you take a small enough village, you may find one where everybody speaks Mongolian. Okay, shifts in domains of language use. So what contexts is the language used in? At home, at work, in public contexts. So level 3, I think, is the most appropriate. The language is used in home domains and for many functions, but the dominant language, so that would be Chinese, usually standard Mandarin Chinese, sometimes other dialects. The dominant language begins to penetrate even home domains. So Mongolian has many functions, but nearly all the speakers are bilingual, so they may use a little bit of Chinese even at home. But again, get a pretty wide range here. I'm narrowing it a little bit because I don't think there's anywhere in Inner Mongolia where Mongolian is the main language of scientific discourse or government and administration. And I don't think there's any part of Inner Mongolia where Mongolian is completely forgotten because it persists in place names, personal names, people's awareness. So it's not quite extinct in terms of usage. Spoiler there. This is new domains, television, internet, stuff like that. So in Mongolian and Inner Mongolia let me back up. Mongolian in Mongolia is written with a Cyrillic-derived script. But in Inner Mongolia, the standard writing is the classical Mongolian Uyghurjin script. So the one that is written vertically looks kind of like Arabic turned on its side, developed during the Mongol Empire. So as you might imagine, a script that is written vertically like this is somewhat difficult to implement on a computer. So there's a definite lag in what you can use Mongolian for. And for this reason, and also because the majority of mass media available in Inner Mongolia is in Chinese, I say Mongolian is used in many new domains. You can type it on a computer. It is on the internet. It is on television. There's a television channel for Inner Mongolia in Mongolian. But if you look at whether people actually use Mongolian in these new domains, I would say it's not so great. There are definitely, if we look at what people choose to do with Mongolian, it's definitely lower. And there are also individuals who don't use Mongolian in any new domains. Even if they may speak the language, they don't necessarily watch Mongolian TV or read books in Mongolian. On the other hand, when we get to availability of materials for language education and literacy, Mongolian is doing pretty great. Level 5, there is an established orthography and a literacy tradition, check, with grammars, dictionaries, texts, literature, and everyday media, check. Writing in the language is used in administration and education, check. Mongolian, along with Chinese, is a co-official language in Inner Mongolia, and there is Mongolian medium education available. On the other hand, you cannot actually get all your administrative business done in Mongolian. You can't even address an envelope in Mongolian and know that it will get there. So I feel that the level 5 it fits all the criteria, but also not fully in practice. The other thing is if we consider something besides standard Mongolian, and if we consider what people choose to do with Mongolian, and if we consider that in some areas administrators don't speak Mongolian and the schools don't use Mongolian, then we have to give it a 2. Okay, and then for the government and institutional aspect, you may be familiar with China's language policy, where certain minority languages are recognized and people have a right to use them, and in autonomous regions, they're co-official languages. And they do have prestige. So I give it a 4 for that reason, but at the same time, the government encourages assimilation to the dominant language, Standard Chinese. There are lots of tests for Standard Chinese proficiency that are required for various kinds of job or school admission. And they test your pronunciation in particular very carefully. So as a second language speaker of Chinese, you're really facing some obstacles. And so from that point of view, I give it a level 2. And there's no sort of regional variation here. And then for community members' attitudes, I would say this one again, most, many, some, or a few. I don't really know how to say how many people support language maintenance. And again, huge variation in attitudes, which has been actually very thoroughly treated by anthropologists, this question of variation in Mongols' attitudes toward language. And then the type and quality of documentation for standard Mongolian is really excellent, comprehensive grammars and dictionaries. It's never complete, obviously. There's so much Mongolian linguistics left to do. But compared to an undocumented language, it's doing great. On the other hand, if we consider dialects, the documentation ranges from fair to fragmentary to inadequate. So to summarize all of what I got from the UNESCO guidelines, again, we can't assess it just by adding up the numbers. In fact, they recommend that we don't even try. So I'm not going to try, but I am going to put them all on the same page for you. So level 5, generally speaking, is safe, not endangered at all, doing okay. Mongolian only hits level 5 when we look at things related to literacy and documentation, and that's because of this long written tradition. Then this is the kind of unsafe zone, and here on down is various stages of endangerment. So, is Mongolian an endangered language? I think we should probably not answer just yes or no to this question. It's clearly not safe. Too many 4s, 3s, and 2s for that. But it's not about to disappear. And the question from my research is, how fast is it declining, and is it likely to actually disappear or just shrink a little bit? And I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to skip very quickly through the methods, but to say it's a sample of about 600 people, and me and a team of other people, so all of us spoke Chinese and Mongolian very well. They were fluent, not as good, but we interviewed people asking them about themselves and also their parents. So we're looking at transmission here. And we had in our sample both people who spoke Mongolian and people who did not. And about 80% did speak Mongolian. So of those people, if their parents or their people who took care of them as children were bilingual in Mongolian and Chinese on some sort of competent level, then the green line at the top is the proportion of children that were bilingual for each age group. So people born in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and after 2000. So, and the red line is language shift. So the parents are bilingual, child doesn't speak Mongolian. So first of all, the rate of language shift is relatively low, at least in this sample, which may not be fully representative, but also we don't see a lot of change over time here. There's a little trickle of loss of speakers in every generation, but, is that my timer? Okay, there's a little trickle of loss of speakers in every generation, but it's really gradual. But if you compare the same data for rural people and then medium-sized towns and then large cities like Kohat or Tongwell, then the language shift goes way up in the cities. And given that the population of China is rapidly urbanizing, and they just crossed over a few years ago to more than 50% people living in urban areas, this is highly relevant for the future prospects of Mongolian. And I'm going to, I think, bring it to a close there. What I think about this UNESCO methodology is that it's good at capturing all these differences, but it is also, I found it very hard to directly apply data and previous research to every single level on here. And so maybe it's just good for kind of field-based subjective assessments. And I would be interested to hear your thoughts on any or all of this. So, thank you.
Your question to Sarala? Yes, please.
It's off. Turn it on.
So that was really great. I just have a question about, I guess, media exposure and also technology. How much of the, for example, movies and television that people are exposed to are coming from across the border? Like how much stuff are they watching that's on the state-owned television station, and how much stuff are they like downloading from the internet that's coming from?
So how much are they for Mongolian media? Well, I'm not sure of the exact proportion, but first of all, on the state-run Mongolian channels, there is actually material from across the border on there as well, plus originally produced stuff, plus dubbed stuff. And I think that music from Mongolia in particular, music videos are really popular, but I couldn't tell you the proportion. Yeah.
And then, so for technology, I'm wondering how much, I'm assuming a lot of the people that you know, and maybe yourself, you guys are on WeChat.
Mm-hmm.
Do you happen to know how much language gets sort of used on WeChat? I mean, is there a way to do the Uyghur Mongolian script in WeChat?
As of about a year ago, I started seeing people's usernames on WeChat in Uyghur. And there are also, so I don't know if you can chat directly in it yet. What people sometimes do is use another app that generates an image of the Mongolian text, and then they send the image through the chat app. And you get also a lot of, especially like holiday greetings and stuff like that, people will use that. But for everyday chatting, Chinese or voice message.
Okay, yeah, voice message.
So the voice messaging has been kind of a game changer.
Thank you.
On that same question, is there any sort of semi-standardized like transliteration system that anybody uses?
Oh, transliteration for Mongolian. This is no. Well, it's not standardized. I think young Inner Mongolian people are much more likely to just use Chinese than to Romanize Mongolian. If they do Romanize it, there is kind of an informal convention that it's based on the spelling of the Uyghur script, but it uses different conventions than the transliteration used by Western scholars. So like they use the letter V to represent one of the rounded vowels that's not, in the Roman alphabet.
question? Oh, and we're good.
Any other questions?
You said that it's, that the script goes from top down and so on, and that it's a strange sort of slip. Now, computer companies can, of course, develop everything. By the way, Arabic script doesn't go the other way, but there is very efficient ways to deal with Arabic. Now, I've heard Mongolians complain that, they've told me that the government doesn't support the development of programs for writing Mongolian script. Now, the question is, perhaps the companies don't invest so much for Mongolian as they invest for Arabic, because it's a bigger market or something. Did you hear anything about what the Chinese government does for or against developing such programs?
I've actually heard a fair amount about it recently. There are a number of linguists in Inner Mongolia who are involved with some kind of what the Chinese government is doing right now is they want to get Mongolian into Unicode. Professor Chezinjab and Nasort are the main ones involved in that project. Mongolian is almost in Unicode. It's not fully supported. Like, there are a lot of rendering problems and code points that haven't been fully resolved. There's also, within China, long before that, there are companies like ConCALL that produce a word processor for Mongolian, and there are a few other sort of individual programs. So the problem is really cross-platform usage of Mongolian, some kind of flexible thing that will just work when some new software comes out, rather than having a parallel software world for Mongolian. So it's not that Mongolian is more difficult than other scripts, it's just different and therefore needs more work, and therefore is always lagging behind because of the small market, I would say.
Thank you very much. We have a little bit of time. Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you.